Hello and welcome to an Echo podcast special with me, Joe Rimmer, going out on both our Royal Blue and Blood Red channels. I'm joined today by Max Rushden, Barry Glendenning and Jonathan Wilson from the Guardian Football Weekly podcast. It's one of the UK's most popular podcasts and they're bringing out a book, the Guardian Football Weekly book. They're here to talk about that, their podcast, Everton and Liverpool and more. The book is available now for $12.99. You can buy it from any of your local bookstores or you can go on the Guardian Bookshop website and save 20% there. Let's get on with the pod. Hello, Max Rushden.
Hello, Joe. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on. Hello, Barry Glendenning.
Hello, Joe.
And Jonathan Wilson. Hello.
Hi, Joe. How are you doing?
Thanks, gents, for coming on. So we're here to talk about your book. Well, first, I think set the scene for listeners by talking a little bit about podcasts in general. Obviously, the most popular football podcast. There's a little bit in the book about how you came to appear on it, Max, but couldn't really work out what's real and what's false. So can we go back and sort of talk about how all you first came to come on the podcast and then we'll talk about how it became so popular.
I mean, if you want to start chronologically, you probably got to start with Barry, who I think has been doing it since 1981. Well, I mean, obviously, podcasts weren't invented until 3 years ago, but you've been doing this for forever, Baz, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been doing this for a very long time. I think it was 13 years before Jake Humphrey actually invented the podcast. We started doing Football Weekly, and it was basically in a soundproofed cupboard in the old Observer building, almost literally a wooden box with bits of foam sellotaped to the wall. And we did this podcast. It started going really well. I think the Football Ramble podcast, who people may know, but they were kind of going at the same time. And James Richardson was our host. And, record scratch to 2000 and... What year was it, Max? You came in as full-time presenter?
Maybe 2017, I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it was 2017. Just coming up to the start of the new season, James Richardson dropped the bombshell that he was leaving, and he and some other rebels were going to set up a rogue podcast of their own. So we were left very high and dry just a day or two before that seain started.
Desperate, I think. You were left desperate.
Desperate. Because we didn't have a presenter. So I got on the phone to Max, who was holidaying with the current Mrs. Rushden on the shores of Lake Como, I believe.
Yeah, well, you said to me, if you don't get this job, you really are shit. Because I used to cover for Jimbo when he was off, much to the annoyance of a lot of the listeners, I think, because I think the Football Weekly audience thought, who's this inverted commas banter merchant from Soccer AM who is arriving to ruin this podcast? But obviously they didn't have anywhere else to go. And then I'd got Barry on the radio on the Sunday show that we do. And so, the exciting thing for me at that time was, I can't remember which bookie it was. Maybe it was William Hill had put the odds up for the next presenter. Next manager, who's it going to be? And you think, and to see your own name in that was really exciting.
Well, I was still late at the time.
I was 7-4, but I'd already got the job. But I was like, I don't want to go to prison, so I don't want to put £1,000 on this. And I really did want to, but I didn't dare do it. I don't think I told anybody to put anybody on it. And that was a long time ago. It was 2017. I think, Wilson, you were on the first pod we ever did, and we made lots of...
I was on the first two, because they were panicking. So a load of the regular guests had gone. And so, shadowy Uber producer Jason rang me. And I remember I was on the top deck of a bus, and he said, do you want to do the podcast today and next week? And I was like, hang on, something's gone wrong here. I'm never on two in a row. So something terrible has happened. So I think I was first on. That must have been either tail end of 2007 or beginning of 2008. But I was very irregular, and then I've become more recent over the last 6 years.
And astonishingly, despite being on it for the last 6 years, have not decimated the audience entirely, and appears to be vaguely popular, to which I am very thankful.
Was there a moment when any of you realised just how popular the podcast was?
Well, I think for me, I mean, like, I clearly this is far less to do with me than the other two, but I remember the most shocking aspect of that. I was in Buenos Aires, waiting to cross the road, chatting to a mate, and the lad walks up behind me and goes, "Are you Jonathan Wilson?" I was like, "Yes." He went, "Oh, I recognise your voice off the podcast," and that was when I was like, "This is very, very weird." And there's been, I mean, Barry and Max must get this way, way more than me, but the fact that people recognise your voice is a very odd thing.
I'd say it's sort of unedifying to like talk. It feels like a sort of difficult to answer this question without sounding like a twat. But like occasionally you will walk past someone either here in Melbourne or back in London who is actually listening to the pod when they see you, and you sort of have to apologise because that is overkill, isn't it? That is too much of you at any given point. And so that's a time when you think, okay, this is, clearly for some reason people are listening to this, and I think those times you notice, okay, maybe this seems to be going quite well, I would say.
Yeah, I'd agree. I probably get recognised 2 or 3 times a week, whether it's my voice or my ruggedly handsome appearance or whatever. And it is very odd, but it's also quite nice. And like Max, I was once on a tube in London going home from work or whatever, and a young lad was standing listening to something on his headphones, and he sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Oh, I'm actually listening to you right now." and there's no real, I don't know what you're supposed to say to that without sounding very weird or narcissistic. But yeah, and then when we first started doing live shows, and they sold out very quickly, and then you would go to these live shows, and people seemed to be having a really great time. And I mean, the first few were quite small. I think the very first one we did was actually in a pub in Liverpool called the Fly in the Loaf. Is that right?
Oh, just Fly in the Loaf, yeah.
Yeah. And there was a Merseyside derby on, and I was unable to get to the game, so our other guest, I think Andy Hunter, the Guardian's Merseyside correspondent, was definitely one of our panellists. He was at the game. Whoever else was appearing in the panel was at the game. But because I couldn't get to the game, I was watching it in the Fly in the Loaf, which you may be aware, Joe, sells a selection of incredibly strong and exotic lagers. So obviously I had a couple to pass the time, and by the time the podcast got started, I was probably in a state of inebriation, which could have ended our live podcast career before it really got going. But it took us a while to work out how to do live shows, and but now we sort of do tours and stuff, and they generally seem to be quite well received. We always try to put a little extra something into live events that you don't get on the ordinary podcast.
And Barry is slightly underselling himself in Dublin on a live show. He's basically like the Pied Piper. I mean, it's sort of totally ridiculous. It's ludicrous. This is not a man anybody should be following for any reason whatsoever. And yet he says we're going to O'Mulligan's or wherever we're going, and then it's just a stream of people just following him. And then some poor barman who's just having a quiet Monday night, and everybody orders Guinness, and they're just there surrounding Barry like he's like the sort of hero of their lives. Lord knows what will happen to those people.
How do different sets of fans, sticking with you, Max, how does a different set of fans take the podcast? What sort of feedback do you get? Who fumes the most? Any running order nonsense? That sort of thing?
Yeah. We get a lot of that. Yeah. And, I think like anybody who's covering anything, we still get a lot of, why do you never talk about my club? And social media is so funny, isn't it? Because you are just generally minding your own business. And obviously now I'm in Australia, the time difference is weird. So occasionally it's sort of, I don't know, maybe 11 in the morning, and I haven't done a pod for like 2 days. And then you'll just get a tweet saying, you ignoring Aston Villa is as typical as it is useless. You're like, I just wasn't. I'm not in that zone at this point. I don't think I don't know if either of you would think differently. I don't think there's a set of fans. Actually, no.
There is.
Since the takeover of Newcastle United, we have obviously spoken a lot about Saudi Arabia and human rights. And I mean, I wasn't doing the pod when the Man City takeover happened, but I certainly, in my professional, I was doing soccer, I was generally dressed as a penguin. But I think, like all of us, we weren't really focused on those issues half as much on sports washing. And there definitely is there is a set of Newcastle fans who have really sort of taken against us because we've been very critical of that. Hopefully we're fair, right, about what they do on the pitch. And it's a real hard balance between, like, we didn't talk about Saudi Arabia on this pod that we've just recorded this morning. But I'm constantly wrestling with that balance of, you know, are we fair on those sort of subjects? And I think we probably weren't. We've probably been harsher on Newcastle on that takeover than we were on Man City because it had happened, I guess, by the time I took over the pod. But I think probably we still have Newcastle United fans who support us, like us, and also find the takeover very troubling. But generally, in sort of footballing terms, I think we annoy a set of fans from every club because it's impossible not to.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Is there any particularly remarkable episodes that any of you can talk about? Any moments at live shows?
Is that good, the pod?
Can we can we talk about the last incident in Dublin? Is that fair?
What was that?
With the poppers?
I mean, that makes it sound a lot worse. Lars had not taken poppers. I think that's important to say. I think my favourite moment might have been the live stream when Barry told his Munich anecdote.
Well, I've got that written down from the book.
Yeah, you've got it written down. I can't hear it again. But I mean, there are little. What happens, I think, with the pod, I don't know if you find this, is that I think people come for the football and you've got to do that well, but then they stay for the people. Not necessarily, you know, me or, you know, but finding out that Barry keeps this loaded super soaker by his bed to spray at people leaving the Brixton Academy when they're being too loud late at night, or finding out that Mark Langdon has never eaten a vegetable. You know, when he just sort of says, you know, I can't remember what it was during COVID. He says, do you know what I've really discovered in COVID? Butter. And he just says these things are just ridiculous, you know, and so those things stay, like the people, and the more you learn about the people, but also there are moments in the pod. There was Wilson, Barry and Barney Ronay were on discussing the witch's curse at Tottenham, which became this endless thing. It's still going. So, and I am arguably guilty occasionally of hammering a joke for too long. I mean, I don't think there's any. And so if there is a little running joke, I will push it and push it and push it. And hopefully they sort of disappear at the right time and another running joke comes in and that kind of thing. But I like to think all the episodes are good, but I can't think of one that sticks out right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think possibly the thing that hit home the most that wasn't football related, but someone on Twitter once posted a video of this raver in Middlesbrough wearing hot pants and a striped sleeveless T-shirt, slapping a stool while dancing in a pub. And it was quite obviously like on a weekday or a Saturday afternoon because there was racing on the television. There was a blonde girl dancing with him. And someone pointed out this guy's uncanny resemblance to Max. And we, for our last tour, I think it was, we set about recreating that video. And we did it in my local pub. There's a pub around the corner from my house. I was able to borrow it for a morning. And we really tried to get every tiny little detail right. I played the role of the blonde girl. Max was as the stool slapping guy himself. We got racing on a loop on the television in the background.
I was the old bloke on the phone underneath the racing. Although annoyingly, I used the wrong hand.
Brilliant.
But we put a lot of work into getting that, like absolutely nailing every little detail of that. And when after the live tour was over, it went down quite well in the live tour. Max posted it on Twitter, and Twitter kind of went into absolute meltdown. And I think at one stage it had well over 1 million views, although I suspect about 100,000 of those were just me repeatedly watching it. So yeah, it's funny things, or it's funny the things that can capture people's imagination.
I would say that for a vaguely serious answer, the pod that we did the day that Christian Eriksen sort of died on the pitch and then unfortunately was brought back to life was an incredibly emotional one. And Barry had done it minute by minute for The Guardian. And I think just because so many people had seen it and had seen those scenes, and I think we had Lars and Philippe Auclair on, and I maybe it's not for me to say, but I feel like we sort of captured that moment pretty well. And I think what listeners appreciate about the pod is that we do, talk about utter nonsense and me and Hot Pants slapping stools. When something serious happens, we can cover that. And also that we do spend the time, going in depth on serious situations. So like the Rubiales situation, we can get a great panel with Susie Rack and Robin Cowan and Solani, Andy Hickman, and do that properly. If we want to talk about racism in the game, we can do that. And we don't necessarily wait for there to be a reason to talk about those things. If we want to talk about something, we can do a special on it. And like the beauty of having The Guardian behind us is, they have lawyers that can say, don't ask that, do ask that, or, and I'm praying that everything's fine because I don't want to get called in the middle of the night to revoice something. And so, before Qatar, we could obviously do the football, but we could really do justice to the migrant workers or women's rights or gay rights. And those things, I think we're in a really fortunate position where we can do those well as the bread and butter, which is talking about, how bad Everton are, or whether Liverpool can mount a title challenge this year.
Yeah. Well, I thought your discussion on Jordan Henderson and the interview with The Athletic was really good last week and hit every sort of note. Jonathan, when did the idea for the book come about and whose idea was it?
Certainly wasn't mine.
Yeah.
I think Barry was asked first. So Barry maybe has a better idea as to whose idea it was, but I think it was somebody in marketing thought, we can, generate some cash here. And they asked Barry to do it. Barry quite rightly said no. And then several weeks later, they finally came to me and I stupidly said yes. But Barry probably has a better answer than I do for that.
But basically, the publishers Faber have a relationship with The Guardian, and I think someone there thought Football Weekly should put out a book, and I was invited to a meeting. I think Max was invited as well, but he just didn't turn up. But I was invited to a meeting, so I had a few ideas, and the main one was I thought doing a book in the style of a Roy of the Rovers annual or a Viz annual or Shoot annual, whatever, would be A, quite funny, and B, quite easy. And I think on the back of that meeting, it was presumed I would be editing it, but I'm hopelessly disorganized and not very good at asking people to do things. Well, at least when it comes to work, I'm a follower. I'm not a leader, so I would be
not much of a follower, to be honest.
Yeah,
You're a constant presence. That's what you are.
Yeah.
You're there.
So I knew that if I was given the job of editing it, it would be an absolute disaster. So I suggested that they asked Jonathan to do it, and that is what happened. So, and he did a pretty good job. He's very good at sending passive-aggressive WhatsApp messages and emails,
Well, better than you are answering them, certainly.
But it's a very fun book. The first thing that jumped out on me, though, just when I first had flicked through it, was vasectomies. What is it about Guardian Football Weekly? And is it something NHS doctors, do they prescribe blood gas wax when people are looking?
I mean, it probably says something about our demographic, doesn't it? A lot of people are at the position in their life. They like Football Weekly, but they also don't want any more children. I mean, that is a classic example of something that is a running joke, that someone sent us a message saying, I was listening when I had a vasectomy. And then obviously, that's not the only person who's listening when they're having a vasectomy. And it is this idea, I guess, of a podcast. It's like, it's not like a radio show or a TV show. You choose exactly when you want to listen to it. And so it's just quite funny that someone would choose this really sort of quite pivotal moment in their life to be listening to us. And, there is that bit in the bit of the book is vasectomies and car crashes, because someone sent us this amazing email about They were driving along. I can't remember what happened. The car flipped. It was a total write-off. They were fine. And yet Football Weekly was still playing out of this sort of like sprawling, smoking mess of a car. And so then as soon as you read out a story like that, you get another one, and then it's just one of those things that rolls on. So now every time a listener's having a vasectomy, we just, we give them a little shout out. And, now I have a toddler, and I'm, considering having another one. If I do, I will be having a vasectomy that day as well. I'll book in on the day of its birth.
Yeah, I guess the dream is for somebody to be vasectomized during a car crash, by the car crash.
While you're here, do you mind tying this up?
But well, I've got two, so I hope you can maybe give me a shout out when I have mine.
Oh, please,
So,
of course.
Yeah. Jonathan, you were the man who told Gerard Houllier that Michael Jackson had died.
Yeah. Yeah, I was. That's basically the story. I was in the Michelangelo Hotel in Santon during... when was it? Was it during the Confederations Cup in 2009? And I was with Tarek Panji, who's now at the New York Times, he was at Bloomberg at the time. Duncan White, who I think he's now a professor of literature at Harvard, but he was working for Sunday Times or Sunday Telegraph at the time. And it popped up on Tarek's screen. And Gerard Houllier was with some Japanese journalists at the next table. And I don't know why my first reaction on finding out that Michael Jackson was dead was to go, Gerard. And I'd spoken to him twice in my life. It wasn't like I knew him. Michael Jackson's dead, and he was and that was it. And then a couple of minutes later, I was going to the toilet, and Christian Carambo was coming back from the toilet, and Christian, Michael Jackson's dead, and he was like, but then the really odd thing was, it was a couple of years later, I was in the Signet Library in Edinburgh, in the law library there, doing a live event, and I told that story, and this bloke near the front starts sort of jumping up and down, waving his hand in the air. So I said, "Sir, you obviously have something to say," and he says, I'm an Italian sports lawyer, and I was sitting with Christian Carambo that night, and Christian Carambo came back from the toilet and told me Michael Jackson was dead. And I was like, how on earth does he know? So yeah, that's how news travels.
Right, and Barry, we have to talk about the Munich anecdote, which seems to be quite infamous.
Well, I'm 50 years old, and 33 years ago, I was in Munich. I had a throat infection. I was on antibiotics, and then I mixed it with a lot of strong Bavarian lager. And in a nutshell, well, not in a nutshell, on a Munich underground carriage, I think it's a U-Bahn they're called, I had a horrific intestinal incident, which, I don't want to put your listeners off whatever they might be doing. Yeah, I do have to sell the book.
Would anybody buy a book because they know that Barry shat himself on a train?
There was a story a couple of weeks ago about how a plane traveling somewhere in America had to be diverted back to its original destination, basically because someone had such an appalling incident of diarrhea that it became a biohazard. And basically the same thing happened to me on a Munich train during morning rush hour. I'd been on an all-nighter. Anyway, it's a story I told during a live event during the pandemic. We were doing a live event on Zoom, and it seems to have gone down really well with everyone, apart from my mother, who was mortified that her son is out there telling this story. And she had asked me, okay, you've told the story, can you just leave it alone now? So here I am telling it again, and it's been recorded for posterity in a book, which I really hope she isn't aware of, the existence of which I really hope she isn't aware of.
It's important to say that. It's important to say that, one, when Barry told that anecdote, it was literally right at the start. I think of our first, it might have been, I don't know if it was our first COVID show, but, a bit like, this is a bit weird. We're sort of learning how Zoom works. And there was an amazing picture where I think me, Wilson, and Lars have just got our head in our hands on the live stream. Like, how is this? Where is this story came from? And then
I mean, I didn't just tell it apropos nothing.
No, there was a question.
Yeah.
There was a question.
It was the answer to a legitimate question posed by somebody.
But then we were having like mugs designed, right? David Squires designed, brilliant cartoonist. His cartoon in the book is so good. And he's a lovely bloke as well. And he obviously designed, my mug was the guy slapping the stool, as in me slapping the stool. And then Barry's holding a big shoe because in the outdoor he just, the the torrents of shit run down into his shoe. And then Barry's like, why am I holding a shoe? He asked someone. And then like one of the bosses said, oh, it's the Munich incident. And then Barry did say, I'm not sure I don't know if you said I don't want my brand to be that. It was something. It was equally like I don't want to. Do I really want to be remembered and known for? Is that it? Is that it? And the real truth is, yes. Basically.
So then there's that time we had lunch in Dublin with Barry's mother and aunt, and his aunt rather brilliantly went, "We all of us have our Munichs," which I guess we do in our own ways.
Mm. Well, we'll leave it there. We'll move on to talk a little bit, if it's all right, about Everton and then Liverpool. We'll start with the senior club in the city, Everton. Jonathan, you wrote a piece about Everton a few weeks ago. Has anything you've seen since then changed your mind on Everton? Do you fear for them this season, do you think?
Yeah, I really do fear for them. I mean, I got quite a lot of grief for that piece, which it was partly... I mean, this is the coward's way out, is to blame the headline, which I don't write. But the headline is slightly kind of worse than the piece itself. The point I was making was, yes, there's been horrendous mismanagement under Moshiri, but actually it's been an ongoing process since the Premier League began. The fact that Everton were one of the big five, and since then they've won one FA Cup and are regularly involved in relegation battles, and even the sort of the decent period under David Moyes, there was a sense of punching above their weight. The level was not sort of a top 6, top 7 club. It was seventh was a real achievement. So this is sort of an ongoing decline, and then it sort of feels that everything that could go wrong does go wrong. I guess Beto looks decent, and he adds a bit of heft up front. But the fact that Calvert-Lewin's been out for so long, he comes back and immediately gets the horrific cheek injury at Villa. And the idea that Dyche now has... in fact, does he even have a worse record than Mike Walker now? I think he was second worst behind Mike Walker when I wrote the piece. But the fact it's worse than Lampard just seems incredible. So the thing that might save him is, I think, certainly compared to last season, I think there's some pretty bad teams at the bottom of the Premier League. But it's clearly going to be a massive struggle. Yeah.
Max, there's a lot of anger in our city about what's happened to Everton. They are sort of the Premier League's crisis club now, aren't they?
I mean, the difficult thing, I guess, is, and I'm sort of thinking of the audience here, right? When we're doing the pod, obviously it's not 50% or more, or around that, listeners who are Everton fans. So we sort of deal with, I guess, when we're talking about so many football clubs, it's hard to do them all in depth. Clearly, there are some real issues. If Everton go down, like, they are not set up for that in a way that probably most of the clubs down at the bottom are sort of set up. It wouldn't be a total disaster if Luton went down, for example, and it really would be. So Everton become this kind of comedy club from where we are. It's just, can this happen? It's sort of, what's the point? What are we all doing here? The chorus of boos, and then you start saying, you sort of find the things nice, like Carlo Ancelotti and Duncan Ferguson becoming this weird duo, like they'd be the best crime-fighting detectives, either set in Naples or in Glasgow. I can't work out which. but like, in serious terms, like, it just must be so draining, right? Like, what do you want? You want a bit of hope, and there is none. And it just feels like they've been... I can't think of when there was. Right? There was all I can think is staying up under Mike Walker and just how, Barry Horn smashing it in, and then getting to the Champions League with David Moyes, but then we're knocked out straight away. So they didn't even have that. And it's just, it is. If you're an Everton fan, it is absolutely bleak, I think, and that there's no fun, is there? Where's the fun? Like,
I guess
carry on.
I guess it's particularly bleak if the other lot across the city are doing well, and winning titles, winning Champions Leagues. But it looks like the Moshiri era is over. I mean, he spent a hell of a lot of money, got almost no bang whatsoever for his buck. You look at the squad. So we're recording this interview shortly after the They were beaten by Arsenal at Goodison. Arsenal only won 1-0, but it was incredibly comfortable Arsenal win. Everton offered very little, if anything at all. And they've been swirling around the plug hole for so long. And they're, moving to this new stadium. There's these potential new owners who coming in who have all sorts of question marks over them. Could they be so bad that they might even possibly fail the fit and proper owners test? It seems possible. So doesn't seem to be anything positive about supporting Everton at the moment. I also think, for what it's worth, and Everton fans may disagree, I think selling Alex Iwobi to Fulham was a big mistake. I think he will be a huge loss to Everton in their struggle to stay up. And when you're saying that Alex Iwobi could be the deciding factor, that's kind of a measure of what sort of state they're in.
Yeah, certainly I don't think they really had much choice. Moving on from Everton and Liverpool, sort of the opposite really. What have you made them so far this season, Jonathan? Do you think that they are getting back to their best under Klopp?
Yeah, not quite, but they're clearly a lot closer than they were last season. I still don't entirely trust them. I mean, is it 9 of the 13 points they've taken this season have come from positions of being behind? I only know because Barry said it on the podcast earlier, so I'm actually nicking one of his stats for once. But I think the forward line is beginning to gel. They obviously needed new investment in midfield, and that's starting to settle down. I still think there's some defensive issues to be resolved, but it may be that as the midfield settles, the defence gets sorted out as well. So, at half time on Saturday, I was sort of thinking, I was right to doubt them. But then they were so good second half that you think actually it was always fine. And you sort of look back at that win at Newcastle, and that was a game where it could easily have gone very badly wrong. We could have lost that 3 or 4-0. And the fact that down to 10 men, 1-0 down, that they settled down, they dug in, and then got the 2 late goals. That really could be a springboard, and things can turn on individual games like that. So I mean, can anybody chase City? I'm not sure, but I think I'd probably say at the minute Liverpool look the side most likely to do so.
I think there's one player that it has almost gone under the radar for so long and is never mentioned in any of Liverpool's games, and that's Trent Alexander-Arnold. I feel I sort of wonder, like, it's pretty funny, like, you go through whole seasons, you think there's probably players playing in the Premier League of 10 years and don't get mentioned once, and it's like everything is Trent Alexander. Can he do this in midfield? Is there a hole behind him in defence? Just a sort of disproportionate amount of conversation about who is a great player, and I love watching him play. You guys it must be relentless for you. I don't know, maybe you just dedicate 2 days of the Liverpool Echo to Trent Alexander-Arnold and you can move on for the other 5. But I've been surprised at how well they've done, actually, and wondered if Klopp was going to, say, you know what, I don't want to rebuild this again. Szoboszlai's great. And I love Darwin Núñez. I mean, he's chaos, isn't he? He's a lot of fun. It'd be fascinating to see what happens. Has the Saudi window closed yet, or they just decide? Can they just keep it open indefinitely? Yes. Oh, it has it? Okay. So they're keeping Salah is big. There's some insight for you, Liverpool fans.
Right, do you think they've got some of the character that sort of defined a couple of years back under Klopp?
I'm not sure. Did that character go away? I don't know. I did notice we got grumpy Jurgen in the build up to the most recent round of league fixtures, and he got the hump with I think the Athletics Liverpool correspondent. And my understanding is he doesn't particularly like that guy. I have no idea what their history is, but I think it's too early to say, but I'm really struggling to answer this question.
Sometimes during a Football Weekly, Barry would just say, I'm not answering that question, go to someone else. But I think he's being polite because it's not Football Weekly.
No, I just wasn't aware that they'd lost their character. I mean, they had a bad season last season, but football being cyclical, that was always going to be on the cards. I too thought Jurgen Klopp might leave. I thought he might be tempted by the prospect of the Germany manager's job when that became available quite recently. But he seems to be quite happy at Liverpool. He's doing his rebuild. Despite what I said in our pre-season pod on the evidence of what I've seen so far from Manchester City this season, I don't think anyone will catch them. But apart from Brighton, Liverpool are the most impressive team I've seen this season.
Brilliant. All right. Thanks very much, gents. Best of luck with the book.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time, guys. Remember, you can buy the new Guardian Football Weekly book now at any local bookstore. It's $12.99, or you can save 20% by going on the Guardian Bookstore website.